Well, transgender bills aren't the only thing making waves in America. No, we now have a border security bill. $118 billion worth of border security bill, which actually miraculously does not just include money for America's own borders. You couldn't make this up. Here, joining me now, very gratefully so, is Michael Knowles. You'll all know this guy, of course, the absolute star of the Daily Wire and the host of the appropriately named Michael Knowles Show. Michael, thank you very much. $118 billion. The highest proportion of it is going to Ukraine. What's going on?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be with you. I suppose I have to correct your English, though. Maybe this is a distinction between the UK and the US, but you've used this phrase, border security bill, which would not apply to the bill before Congress because the bill does nothing to secure the border. Actually, all our border security bill does is open up the border. So perhaps the illiteracy here is on the part of Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell, but whoever came up with this silly phrase, it certainly doesn't apply. The bill has somehow managed to lower my estimation of Republicans in Congress, which I thought could not be any lower. As you point out, a lot of the money goes to Ukraine. Then the rest of the money goes toward letting in even more illegal aliens, along with more legal immigrants as well. The only purpose of the bill is for Joe Biden to be able to share some of the blame for this deeply unpopular migration crisis with Republicans, and of course, leave it to the Republicans to do everything in their power to take the bait.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that the US border could be temporarily shut down if encounters with migrants exceed specified limits. I mean, you guys have got thousands of people coming across your border every single day. I mean, what's the specified limit?
I'll tell you exactly what the specified limit is. Presently, I remember a few years ago when there were 2,000 migrants coming across the border a day. We said this was an unprecedented historic crisis, a national emergency, an invasion, for goodness sake. What this bill would do was would set a specified limit at 5,000 per day for 7 days. So you would need 35,000 illegal aliens registered as coming across the border per week to begin to exercise this authority to shut down the border, or you would need 8,500 in one day. But it's even more ridiculous than that because the president would only be able to exercise this authority to shut down the border for a handful of days per year. So the net effect of this would be, among all of the other tripe in the bill, would be to massively expand illegal immigration, which is what the Democrats want in the long term because they think it will give them a permanent electoral majority, and they might be right about that. In the short term, what they want to do is cast some of the blame off to Republicans. Mercifully, the conservatives in the Senate and the conservatives in the House have shut this down, but the swishes on the right are still trying to bring this across the finish line.
I just find this absolutely remarkable. Presumably the American public don't actually want this.
Certainly not. This issue of mass migration is probably the single biggest motivator of conservative voters in the United States, and not just in the United States. In your own country, obviously, migration was a major driver of the Brexit. In Hungary, it's led to the popularity of Viktor Orban. It led to the election of Giorgia Meloni in Italy. It's led to conservative movements in Spain and Germany and Sweden and elsewhere. We recognize in the West, ordinary voters do at least, that if we are to have our own countries, if we are to maintain our way of life, then at the very least, we must be able to control who comes into our country and who exercises political right here. Unfortunately, the political elites from Washington to Brussels, everywhere in between and beyond, don't want the people of the West to have that right. And so they keep trying to ram bills such as this immigration proposal down our throats.
Yeah, I mean, quite clearly, the vast majority of Western leaders, whether that's in Europe, in the UK, or in the US, have at some point decided that they do not care for their own people's culture or personal safety and decided to just crack on with a load of illegal immigration anyway. And indeed, legal immigration as well. The numbers are absolutely ridiculous on that. Can I just ask you, there's a graph I've got in front of me here. So it just shows where the money goes for this bill, right? So Ukraine gets the highest amount with $60.1 billion. The states are getting a fraction of this, $20.2 billion. I mean, how can they even call this a border security bill? I just find it, surely Americans would rather have more of their taxpayers' money spent on their own issues. Donald Trump said build a wall. You could build the Great Wall of China for this amount of money.
Of course. So this always happens in Washington. You'll get one policy priority that anyone cares about at all. That will receive the least amount of funding in the bill. And then the entrenched interests will cram all of their pet projects in there. The irony here is that the actual interest to the American people, which is curbing migration, that does not receive a red cent, actually, because all of the money set aside for it will actually be spent to expand immigration and to expand the powers of the Secretary of Homeland Security and to expand the powers of the president to let in more illegal aliens. And then the rest of it goes to perhaps the second least popular issue after mass migration, and that is this war in Ukraine that doesn't seem to have a strategic vision, that doesn't seem to be going anywhere, and that the American people are sick of sending their money to, where the money goes unaccountable, where the weapons go unaccountable, and where we don't achieve any strategic ends. So I think you've actually got to tip your hat to Washington, D.C. for coming up with a perfectly unpopular and disastrous bill.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of stuff that George Orwell would have had nightmares over, isn't it? But let's just talk about Donald Trump now. So an appeals court has rejected Trump's immunity claim in a federal election interference case. Just going to give a bit of context here. So a 3-judge panel of appeals court judges issued their ruling today. Okay. The former president's lawyers argue that he enjoys sweeping legal protections for actions taken in office. It's the second time judges have now ruled that he does not have immunity. What do you make of this? I mean, we hear a lot about warfare, don't we? But is this lawfare against Trump now?
This is certainly lawfare, and they're just going to get him any way they can. Nobody should be surprised by the outcome of any of these cases. The Democrats have been partnering with the law enforcement arm of the United States government all the way up to the DOJ and the FBI since before Trump got into office. Let's not forget, the FBI and the DOJ colluded with Democrats to cook up a bunch of fake information with a fake dossier to illegally spy on the Trump campaign. And then once Trump managed to get elected, despite their best efforts, they were able to use that same fake information cooked up with partisan Democrats to undermine Trump's administration. Then they impeached him at one time for nothing. Then they impeached him a second time for nothing because they failed to get a conviction the first time. And so you've got to give Democrats credit for never giving up. They just keep pushing and pushing. So they went after Trump in New York because he apparently met a gossip columnist in a department store 30 years ago. Seems a little dubious to me, but they went after him there for that. They went after him in Georgia for making a phone call to the Secretary of State during an election that was very clearly rigged, if not outright stolen. And then they went out to Washington, D.C. because Donald Trump supposedly created an insurrection for questioning the results of the election just years after Hillary Clinton refused to accept the results of her own loss in an election, and as Stacey Abrams was still pretending to be the governor of Georgia. And then finally they're going after him for having classified information, which every president in modern history before Donald Trump has done, which Joe Biden has done in a far more egregious way with a drug addict in his home who was peddling American influence to our enemies overseas. None of that matters. If you try to apply logic or reason to these Trump prosecutions, you're going to come up short. We have to recognize it's not a prosecution, but a persecution. The verdict is already in. Trump is guilty, and they have to ostracize him to St. Helena. Now they're just trying to backfill the explanation.
You raise a good point there, which is I think that the pro-Biden lot should be very, very careful what they wish for here. Because if Trump doesn't have immunity, then Biden won't have immunity for anything. The invasion of the border, letting in terrorists. You mentioned a couple of things there about classified documents. I mean, can you imagine them going after Biden in this way? Presumably it's only a matter of time before they're calling for him to be locked up. Oh no, wait. Of course they won't do that because he's not Orange Man bad.
That's the problem. You know, if we could really count on what's good for the goose being good for the gander, then I think everyone would be a lot more polite. But the liberals know that they control every major institution in the United States, increasingly even including the military, which previously was a conservative holdout. So they have no fear whatsoever. I mean, if you look right now, the House Republicans are trying to impeach the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas because he's opened up the border and is ignoring the laws. Now, if Donald Trump can be indicted or impeached rather over nothing, over maladministration, which is basically what they went after him for, even though he had the best administration of anyone in my lifetime, surely we can go after Alejandro Mayorkas. But they just know that they're going to be playing by a different set of rules. And so they're not concerned that the consequences of their own actions will ever revisit them.
I am really keen to talk to you about what's going on in New York City, because I love it when people are forced to suckle at the teat of their own disastrous ideology. And that clearly is what's happening now, all right? New York was, hey, come on, dreamers, come on down, we'll bus you in, we'll fly you in, anyone can make a home in New York City. And now they've realised they've got far too many of them, they can't cater for them. And supposedly, the mayor, Eric Adams, is launching a $53 million pilot programme to provide prepaid credit cards for migrant families staying in New York City hotels. What the heck is happening here? Families could receive up to $1,000 monthly, refilled every 28 days. I don't know why you and I bother working, you know. Seriously, why do we bother working when I could just get on a plane to Ecuador or somewhere, walk through the southern border, find myself in a New York City hotel receiving $1,000 a month?
You'll find yourself in a very nice New York City hotel. And by the way, you won't need a family to do it. The Biden administration is pretending that this is all about helping young families. I was walking around New York not so long ago. I was walking past the Roosevelt Hotel. This is one of the most famous hotels in New York. Big, beautiful hotel right there by Vanderbilt, right by Fifth Avenue, right by Grand Central, prime real estate. And I look around and I see a ton of fighting age foreign men, some clearly from Latin America, some clearly from Africa, at the very least from Caribbean islands, from all over the place. Because don't forget, the migration crisis is leading people to do exactly what you just said, which is they'll fly in from another continent. They'll land in Nicaragua or Honduras, and they'll just walk right up and they'll enter into the U.S. There were maybe a couple of young women, a couple of kids, but what we're talking about here is young men. We're talking about economic migrants who are coming here and are not only being given the opportunity to work, they're being given credit cards. They're being put up at some of the nicest hotels in New York City. Meanwhile, New Yorkers are being kicked out of their parks. New Yorkers are being kicked out of the facilities that they use for recreation and for work. The New York City mayor, Eric Adams, tried to push against this. He said illegal immigration might destroy New York City. He had a meeting with the Biden White House scheduled, and then what happened? Just before that meeting with the Biden White House, Eric Adams started to be investigated for corruption. And all of a sudden, he dropped his pointed remarks about illegal immigration. This is what the liberal establishment must protect. They recognize that their long-term political prospects will only be served by importing a mass flux of foreigners who they believe they can control. And they will not give it up for anything.
You know what, though? My only hope is that at some point this comes down and bites them in the backside, because we're importing a load of people into Britain, right, who do not have the same values as our liberal elite when it comes to women's rights, who do not have the same values as our liberal elite when it comes to gay rights, who do not have the same values as our liberal elite, frankly, when it comes to absolutely anything. And at some point, those two groups of people are going to have to meet. And I really hope, I mean, I don't think it's going to happen, but I really hope that one day, both in America and Britain, the very people who imported all of these legal immigrants get voted out by them as well, because you know what? They don't like their woke progressive ideologies. But Michael, thank you very, very much. Absolutely tremendous to have you on the show. I'm a massive fan. I hope to talk to you again very, very soon. That is the wonderful Michael Knowles, off of the Michael Knowles Show on the fabulous Daily Wire. Take care.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be with you. I'll look forward to the next time.